Light guns! The difference between man and boy. The idea of a light gun is simple. Point at the screen, aim at your target, pull the trigger, and... Yeah, that tends to happen.
Because these things are just not really that useful anymore. You see, as gaming advanced, the need for things like a gun controller just weren't as appealing.
The idea back then was to emulate the arcade shooter and to prove that video games were more toy-like after the crash of 1776 BC, before computer games. So when you got your entertainment system and packed in it was a gun and a robot that spun shit, you were able to emulate this kind of arcade experience.
And what better way to do that than with everyone's favorite activity?
People don't give Duck Hunt enough credit. Along with Rob, this minigame with firing weapons played just as big a part in convincing people that the NES was more than a video game console. Do you see what you made them do? You made them lie! While they are more infamous for not working when set up with the right TV, when you actually do everything right, it's pretty fun.
Something about being able to shoot the screen and having that shot translate in-game just triggers something in my little sweaty gamer brain.
It's simple in concept, but highly fun in execution. There were a ton of games that utilized the NES Zapper, but of course, this idea of shooting things with guns didn't really sit well with parents. There was a shift in how the games were going to be made and presented from now on. They had to get more cartoony, and the iconic gray gun that came with the console was swapped to become orange. And it looks fucking lame!
Thanks, Mom!
However, such a thing wears off after a while. The games themselves kind of became limited in how they were made, so it never quite left the just shoot the thing. It also just wasn't needed anymore. People loved the NES, and it revived the gaming scene after the catastrophe that was you. But Nintendo knew that there was a market for this. After all, arcade shooters still existed, so when the Super Nintendo existed, you know that meant giant f***ing bazooka!
This thing's badass!
Are you playing with toy guns again, loser?
Shut up, Kevin!
The Super Scope. While not as talked about often, it is still just as influential in the lifespan of the Super Nintendo. Commercials for this thing were tactical. It was like you were a soldier fending off bad guys from whatever this is. Unlike the NES Zapper, the Super Scope was wireless. Pop this sensor on top of your TV, try to shoot the things, realize it needs to be plugged into the second controller port. Dude, I was having like an hour of panic attacks. I spent so much money on this. And bam! You're the town's new slayer.
With the gun now being wireless, it made mobility and distance less of an issue when playing the game. Because with the Zapper, you had to be fairly close to your TV for the shots to even be registered at all. And the wire meant that you couldn't really be too far away from your console. But not having to deal with any of that makes for a more comfortable experience. Well, that's fucking stupid.
Why the f would you put the firing button on top? Half the time my muscle memory kicks in from the war, and I'm left missing my target because they put the fire button on top of the gun! That's like putting the light switch inside the light. It's idiotic. But I will say, the accuracy is insane on this thing. After calibrating, whatever you aim at with the eyepiece, your shot will pretty much always land right there.
Finally, all it took was a video game to get my aiming down. Now I pee perfectly. But the Super Nintendo was only really made in response to the Sega Genesis. And while Sega had a knack for copying Daddy Nintendo over here.
Thus introduces the Sega Menacer. A name so cool that the actual thing doesn't want to fucking work. Don't ask how much I spent on this. Just please. It was the same idea as the Super Scope, only this one was more customizable. You can have it as a handheld blaster, a heavy-duty blaster, or make it more bazooka-like, and I gotta admit, I like this way more than any other light gun. The trigger's in the right spot! Are you taking notes? Just like the Super Scope, the Menacer would come with a variety game pack, with 6 games showing off what the Menacer would do. But later editions of the gun would come with Terminator 2.
This was the arcade shooter back in the day. People loved the movie, so of course, why not turn that into a game where you shoot the Terminators?
Comparing it to the arcade version, it's pretty one-to-one, and the Super Nintendo also had its own Terminator 2 shooter game, but playing with this thing is just so clunky. When it came to arcade ports, Sega just knew how to do them better. At least that's what I would say if the gun worked!
The idea of bringing the arcade shooter home wasn't really out of nowhere. The home consoles always wanted to emulate the arcade since the beginning. So with these more powerful consoles being able to better that, and to be able to take this genre to a whole new level, there must have been a ton of games that came out for these guns.
8 games for the Menacer, 14 for the Super Scope.
But they're guns.
Yeah, but people got quickly bored of the concept. This was during the time where games became adventures and started to tell more stories. You didn't want a high score, you wanted to do crazy shit with a whip, or fly around with a cape, or look at porn in 16 bits. The only Super Nintendo game game that actually required the Super Scope was Yoshi's Safari, an on-rail shooter that played more like an adventure, and if there were more games like this, then maybe people would have bought into the idea more.
And by the time the next generation of systems came out, really, light guns were nowhere to be seen. There was one made for the N64 that never came out, and I think the PlayStation had one, but I think it just offered the same as the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. And it's kind of sad too, because with the advancement of TV technology, these guns essentially just stopped working.
Every gun here requires the quirks of CRTs to even work, so when LCD TVs came out, oops, they don't work anymore.
It's a shame because the idea is still pretty cool. If only there was a way to revitalize it, you know?
I mean, come on, it's so fucking obvious. The Wii was the only console that really thrived with the light gun type game. Wireless controller, plastic fucking zapper accessories, and every game that required shooting utilized the pointer functionality. These games were elevated by the Wii. It's like that one uncle who's only fun when he drinks a bit too much. The first-person shooters like Call of Duty would come into the mix and have a great level of immersion. Full-fledged titles like Resident Evil 4 could have precise aiming, and the normal arcade type shooters like Link's crossbow training could even be put into the mix. It's the most variety the genre ever had, and thanks to the Wii U, things got even crazier. The gamepad acting as a different view, gyro aiming now being a thing, releasing older NES light games. It was a renaissance in a sense.
This is amazing! Hello? What do you mean that was over 15 years ago? Well, damn it feels like every light gun type game is from years ago. How am I supposed to get my fix for shooting things in the modern age?
I could give it a try.
Computer, you have shooter games?
I have one in mind.
I'm in no way sponsored by Oblivion Eagle. I just genuinely love this game. Oblivion Eagle takes everything good about bullet hells and turns it into an arcade shooter, fit with RPG elements and an intriguing story. When I tell you that this game gets addicting, oh man, I would play this every day for a good month, and the game's not even out yet! It reminds me a lot of Undertale, mainly the genocide route where every boss fight was a crazy endeavor, but here, instead of brutally murdering your friends, you're beating up actual bad guys.
Finally, a game in which I won't feel bad for my actions.
This isn't funny, dude! You're freaking me out! I said let me out!
This game works very well with a mouse and keyboard, but I could totally see something like the Nintendo Switch using the gyro control as a way to aim and shoot your gun.
But it's an indie game and it's only available for PC right now. It's not too intensive a game, in fact. It's very easy to run on almost anything. My good friend Nick is the one developing it, and after years of seeing game after game, development after development, I'm so happy to see this game finally become a product, which you can play right now! Again, I am not sponsored. I'm just really proud of my friend, and I want everyone to at least try the game's demo out. His team worked very hard on it.
And maybe I'm just being a bit optimistic here, but I feel like Oblivion Eagle is the first step into reviving this genre as a whole. I would totally love to see future games build off this kind of format. I think it's so cool to finally see an indie game take on the challenge of making a modern day arcade shooter and doing it in such a way that doesn't make it feel like a gimmick. I mean, that's how all of this started, with just one little gimmick. Really, every fucking time?